Welcome to this webinar, Do Dreams Still Matter for Psychoanalysis? My name is Laura Katz. I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm full member of the IPA and FIPAL, Latin America Psychoanalytic Federation. Since December 2023, I'm chief editor of the Journal of Psychoanalysis of the APA, and it's a pleasure to be part of this interesting webinar. Thanks, Mariano, for inviting me to be the moderator. I would like to introduce some topics related to the webinar. There are topics, although they are well known by all of us, dreams continue to be relevant. They still matter for psychoanalysis. Everybody knows that interpretation of dreams, the article of Freud, 1900s, marks the origin of psychoanalysis with its methods of interpretation. Freud concludes throughout his work that the dream is the realization of an unconscious desire. Such contribution was so revolutionary as the method of interpretation based on associations. We can also affirm that it's from dreams that Freud discovers that the unconscious exists, and that to reach the unconscious is not necessary to know how to dive, it's important to listen. What is the merit that made Freud affirm that the work on the interpretation of dreams was his most finished work? The answer is that when he had difficulties and hesitation with the problems of neurosis, he brought back to interpretation of dreams to find the answers. I hope this introduction be inspiring for the presentation of my colleagues. Before handing over the presentation to our panelists, I will explain briefly the format of how the webinar is going to function. It has two sections. In the first section, each of our two panelists will give their presentation. The second section is a question and answer portion devoted to the free exchange of selected questions and ideas with the panelists and attendees. You will find a question box on the right side of the screen. If you would like to ask a question, please write in this box. You can post your questions throughout the whole course of the webinars from the very beginning. Please remember that questions will not be answered until after all presentations from the panelists have been complete. Remember, you can submit questions to the speakers using the question tab in their control panel. You can do it as soon as you wish. There will only be answered during the question and answer sections. Well, now we are ready to begin. I will introduce Marilyn Charles. She's PhD, ABPP, a psychologist and psychoanalyst at the Austen Riggs Center in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, a training analyst at the Chicago Center for Psychoanalysis. She's the chair of the Association for the Psychoanalysis of Culture and Society and a British Psychoanalytic Council Scholar. Her book includes Working with Trauma, Lessons from Bion and Lacan, and the forthcoming Echoes of Trauma, Meaning and Identity in Psychoanalysis. The title of her presentation is Dreams, Dreaming, and Psychic Space. So, Marilyn?
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and to talk about this topic that's very dear to my heart. Nowhere do we see our psychic struggle so clearly as in the world of dreams, which call to our attention the emotionally charged, aesthetically driven bits of lived experience, and also the patterns through which human dilemmas are revealed, following Bion's suggestion that the purpose of psychoanalysis is to enhance the capacities for feeling, thinking, and dreaming, Bionian field theorists conceptualize psychoanalytic work as a dreaming process through which elements of experience become elaborated into meaningful symbols. As Lacan notes, people often come to psychoanalysis seeking not recognition, but rather misrecognition, hoping to hide in the consulting room whatever they have been hiding from themselves. Opposing that project, dreams provide metaphors embedded in the person's own history and experience. Working with dreams allows analyst and analysand to avoid becoming ensconced in whatever preconceptions might obscure the issues at hand, but rather to learn to play together with possibilities. This process affords sufficient displacement to allow condensed, highly personalized meanings to formulate themselves into symbols and characters that can be recognized, worked with, and integrated. In our dreams, we find ourselves. As Milner puts it, in our productions, we are able to recognize the unique psychophysical rhythms and patterns that mark our particular way of being in the world, Kristeva's cora that undergirds Lacan's imaginary. Each person has their own unique ways of marking and designating meanings. The relationship between the dream and the dreamer and the analyst marks exactly the respect needed for a useful psychoanalysis to occur, recognizing that each person holds the keys to their own intrapsychic constructions. From this perspective, as the analyst tries to make meaning from what they are learning, they must be open to the guidance offered by the person themselves as our projections fail or falter, as we bump into the something other or something more of that individual. In this process of noticing their otherness and their uniqueness, we are helping to build the reflective capacities so crucial to living well. Dreams reside in the realm of metaphor, which is the fertile playing ground of meaning making. The person who brings in a dream is offering us a production, and we do well to treat it respectfully, recognizing that our ideas may be containing, but they may also be obstructive, perverting the person's own meaning, or even destroying the bridge we are trying to build between us. Coulthard reminds us of the inherent mystery at the heart of psychoanalysis and of the human being, a mystery best appreciated rather than resolved. Psychoanalysis tends to involve a trading of metaphors, and we do have a tendency to prefer our own, which makes it important to be open to those offered by the other person and to try to find our way into joining them in their own play rather than insisting on controlling the rules of the game. It's kind of like Winnicott's squiggle game, where the most important element is taking turns, adding something of our own in relation to what is offered, and being open to what we are offered in return. Psychic space is larger and more amorphous than we can even imagine, which makes it a useful playing field for imagining impossible things, including allowing traumatic meanings to come forward in their own way and time. Insisting on knowing can impede this process of building a transformational space in which possibilities can exist and evolve without being foreclosed. At times, the person may not even be able to remember their dreams. One man, for example, kept reporting disturbing dreams with no memory of them. I asked him what was the feeling in the dream. As he described the turbulent quality of the dreams, we were able to link it to the turbulence in his current life and ways in which his avoidance of looking at detail was keeping him from making the decisions that might reduce the turbulence. In this way, the dream provides an entry point, even with those who are so profoundly alienated from themselves, and from others. I find that even very traumatized people who are quite shut down can show their vitality, creativity, and potentiality in their dreams. One man, for example, only showed himself through his dreams. Dull and concrete in daily life, John's dreams depicted a rich internal world marked by the search for the secret keys to living that had always eluded him. As he began to recognize that the secret knowledge remained hidden because he had been looking outside for what could only be found within, he began to move from suspended animation toward greater vitality. Initially, these shifts happened only in his dreams. Taking seriously the images and meanings we glean from the repetitive tropes in his dreams helped John recognize his own values, preferences, and desires, and to begin to allow these to guide his life. He becomes aware of the need to build his own library of lived meanings. We needed more room for an archive, he says, marking Derrida's crucial juncture between external authority and the social order that allows meaning to be made. John needed to be able to organize meanings through his own authority in relation to a social order that can engage with him in refining those meanings in order to build an archive to which he can find the keys. This transition from external to internal authority surfaced notably in one pivotal dream. John is searching for secret knowledge and learns that he can find it in a hut nearby. He enters the hut and is surprised to find that the secret knowledge is not what he had imagined, but rather something that he already knew. That dream anchored that his fear marks a feeling, not some larger, terrible truth. In the dreams, John shows himself how he locates and mislocates aspects of his own being and experience. As he develops the capacity to learn from that experience, he is able to build on his knowledge and develop his own archive. Through our work at taking seriously and playfully his dreams, John begins to develop his own capacities for feeling, thinking, and dreaming more fully, finally finding the secret knowledge to which he alone holds the keys. My position was to hold hope and invite sufficient playfulness that he could find them. There is a truth to each person's life. As we discover and learn to live from that place, there are reverberations for all those whose lives we touch. Thank you. You're muted, Laura.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you very much. Well, now I will introduce Felipe Matamala. He's a full member of the Northwestern Psychoanalytic Society and Institute in Seattle, Washington, and vice president of the Chilean Society of Psychoanalysis in Santiago, Chile. Throughout his career as a psychologist in Chile, he has worked on the issues of generational trauma and political violence. Currently, he is a counselor in a community health center for the Latino population in Washington State, United States of America. The title of his presentation is Political Nightmares, Are We Dreaming to Same Trauma? So, with this introduction, Felipe.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to share screen. So give me one sec. Good. And I think it's okay. Okay. So these presentations refer to part of my work with people and their family who suffer political trauma in the dictatorship in Chile. For 7 years, I've worked with the first, second, and third generation in a human rights program from the government of Chile. After that, I've been dedicated to research and understanding different aspects of the traumatic experiences and the effects in the Chilean population, using the psychoanalysis as a frame to understand theoretical and clinical this complex phenomenon. I would like to introduce a couple of thoughts about trauma and transmission before discussing the nightmares in the second generation. When we consider different ways to transform the trauma experience of the first generation, we always have in mind the unconscious communication between the first and the second generation. In this sense, I believe we always transmit part of our experiences to the next generations, but the way to do it depends on whether we are available to dream or not. In other words, how possible is to transform the traumatic first generation experiences in a language or in a way to talk about that. The shame and the repetitive dreams are part of the traumatic experience as the ego tries to deal and elaborate the trauma within the body and through the language. Moreover, Abraham and Torok, Nachin, and Cicerón introduce multiple ideas to think about the effects such as shame, grief, and sadness. The idea of the crypt merge the fact that when someone suffers a traumatic situations, show up the shame and the impossibility to talk about the experience. Both are the principal phenomena of how the trauma is living in the first generation. In addition to that, melancholia is another expression of the trauma and shows a way to notice in the first generation something that was lost because of the traumatic experience. In this sense, shame and melancholia create an atmosphere which involves the generations and keeps them like a ghost in the room. In the second generation, these phenomena surround the object's relationship and show how the second generations incorporate the object. Moreover, the second generation sense something in the environment, manifesting in various behaviors, thoughts, and fantasies, which explain some part of the trauma history from the first generation. Therefore, this mechanism helps the first and second generation to keep them alive with the only rule: we shouldn't talk about this. The silence emerges. In the same way, the second generations probably knows part of the episode, but they are unable to discuss or ask questions about it to the first generation, because doing so might increase the pain of the experiences. The fantasy of destroying and harming others is present in the relationships and within the internal world of the second generations. That keeps the secret in a safe place, but also maintains the trauma without the possibility to think about that, preventing it from being processed. Furthermore, Freud shows how the trauma works in the egos, which needs to process the experience and deal with something that has been lost. On the same page, the traumatic experience brings to the ego traumatic dreams that have a different meaning than the principle of the pleasure. They don't drive us to that unconscious wish. Indeed, it shows how difficult it is for the apparatus dealing with that energy when the trauma is still repeating. Obviously, Freud discussed this on different levels: mechanical in the sense where is the energy and the traumatic content, that will be possibility to elaborate the experience. In both cases, we should ask ourselves, where does the trauma go in the first generation if the dreams cannot be elaborated, the trauma, or are just a way to discharge energy and transform part of the traumatic thoughts? We know that part of the elements will be transferred to the next generations. My experience shows that part of the transmissions between the generations appears in different ways. Families with members who suffered torture during the dictatorship in Chile expresses various symptoms and behaviors, such as don't talk with anyone if you don't know the political side or keep silence about your political opinions. In this sense, you are not able to talk and think about the episode because you can be punished or disappear if you tell someone else what do your political ideas are. These atmospheres, which create the silence, is a good way to grow fantasies in the second generation. These fantasies cannot be expressed unless the parents are given the opportunity to talk. The presence of the death and the trauma spread the idea that objects' relations are not available to do a reverie. That means part of the traumatic elements cannot be transformed for the first generations and elaborate with the possibility to forget. Additionally, I believe that part of those elements which are not available to be transformed into alpha elements will appear in nightmares or bad dreams, depending how the new generation is able to process the trauma complex of their parents. Like Ogden says, the nightmare in a child is more open to be transformed, like a child who wakes up in the middle of the night and the mother or dad goes to the child and is comforted in these situations. Both are open to think and transform the dream into an alpha element, to keep dreaming. If these situations does not open, the children will have a bad dream, a horror come true, and the objects will transform into a dimensional object, incapable to think or thinking and transforming the horror. But how we can transform the bad dreams if the objects are not available to talk about the trauma? My response is that dreams help us to transform part of that traumatic experience in the second generations. But there is always a strange perceptions about these things are prohibited in our relationship. In this sense, the transference responds how much the patient can possibly trust the analyst's parent figure, especially when there is a fear that anybody can hurt me, or I feel scared to destroy my parents with my words. The traumatic dreams by the second generation often brings condensed horror, the scenes, incestuous feelings towards their parents, and fantasies of being a survivor. The possibility to transform and interpret these dreams can reveal how their parents lived within the traumatic atmospheres. The possibility of transforming part of that bad dream into a nightmare shows me something which couldn't be transformed in the middle of the generations. In another sense, these dreams express a way to symbolize or represent the trauma in the first generation and how the second generation has internalized the objects, their fears and secrets. For example, some analysts mention dreams about being in the same place of the torture with their parents or even has been experienced the same sexual torture with their parents on prison during the nightmare. All these dreams share part of the traumatic experience and which are not able to be connected because the second generation report the idea, even if you are my analyst, I will never betray my parents. That feelings appears in the transference like this dimensional object. The analyst project on us the fantasy, if you listen, you will be damaged. So that's neutralize our thoughts. Many times when the second generations try to understand more about those dreams, it was impossible. In the analysis, it is not just a dream that needs to be interpreted. Sounds and unspoken element need to be transformed and then be interpreted. I remember an idea of Ida Feinberg, who says that sometimes the analysts cannot understand some acts exist in the life of the patient. Moreover, these acts are often related to transgenerational trauma experience, which have never been symbolized and appears like something in the middle between the nightmares and dreams. In this sense, some aspect of the trauma are split off and never elaborated by the first generation. As a result, the way to function in the second generations will be unknowing the suffering of the parents, feeling bizarre things and unknowing where they come from. I believe that some hiding aspect of the trauma appears and disappears in the long trip of the analysis, and only the counter-transference will be available to transform those parts and survive the horror of listening to the dreams which are connected from their first generations.
Okay, thank you, Felipe. Thank you, Felipe. Very important, your paper, your presentation. I would like to introduce the exchange between my colleagues with some questions. The first, I think that both presentations includes the trauma effects in the dreams. And I would like to ask, when danger or horror becomes evident, the veil is broken and the dreamer is expelled from the dream location. Can we affirm that in nightmares, the words stop? That's one question. And the other is related to a point that Freud discussed and put it in his articles. Freud called, he said that in the best interpreted dreams, there comes a point where one cannot progress, like it's a stop. Freud called this the navel of the dream. And my question is that this concept of the navel of the dream leaves open a point where the interpretation work cannot be concluded, meaning that something cannot be said. How could this boundary be thought, this stop? Well, these are the two questions in different ways. You can answer whatever, you can begin from whatever you want.
Do you want to start, Felipe?
Oh, you can go, Marilyn. It's okay.
I really appreciated your paper, Felipe. I'm also very interested in the intergenerational transmission of trauma. And when you're talking, I was thinking about Maurice Apri's work, where he talks about the transgenerational errand, the errand we get sent on to try to repair what previous generations failed to do. And so part of what I hear you talking about is the thing that not only hasn't been symbolized, which may relate to the issue of the navel, but also that must be and can't be symbolized, you know, in terms of what you're saying about the betrayal, the experience betrayal in speaking about the thing that couldn't be spoken about. And I wonder if you could say more about that, about how you're hearing that and the people you're working with, because it's a particular difficulty where there's something at stake for the person, and the analyst can have the idea that, oh, if you just said it, everything would be fine, without appreciating the rupture that happens in the speaking of the thing that couldn't be spoken about, which requires, I think, a repositioning of ourselves as the analyst to really appreciate the harm and be able to speak to that, so that in words you can recognize to the person their experienced danger rather than just pushing them toward it, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I was thinking in the idea to, with this population or this type of analysis, we can find the silence like in the atmosphere. So that for me is the beginning of we are dreaming, but there is a part of that we cannot say, right? Even if I can understand something like in the second generation or in the first generation, there is a part which needs to be symbolized, right? But there is another part which is not available to do that, right? And that's part of transmitted in the generations, right? So when the second generations appear that element, like in the dream, they just stop and they feel like a little bit confused in my experience. And we try to understand which meaning will be for them, because it's something open, like a secret that's open, right? And it's painful for them, especially. But also it's like it's a way to for me will be when you wake up in the night, it's a way to protect something too. It's wake up, we cannot talk about this, and try to figure out that. So it will be kind of mechanism. Yeah.
Now, I will ask Felipe, don't you think that it's much better for the second generation to speak about the trauma, what happened during that period of the dictatorship? And in the first generation, people that don't want to talk about that. They want to close that period. So it's a challenge for the second generation to put words to that period. Don't you look at this situation that the first generation don't like to speak?
I mean, even in my experience working with the first generation, they are in the treatment or in the analysis, they are able to talk about the trauma, but they just keep it then, right? Keep and trying to not speak too much, because they know this is it's not only a painful, they create a kind of sensation to, I'm gonna damage to another, I'm gonna hurt someone else with that, right? And the second generations feels that they are open to talk, but they feel we cannot talk about this because it's a kind of prohibition. It's denied. So that will be a way to dream. To me, the dreams could be a free way to talk and figure out that. and have that chance. But
Mm.
because in the reality or in the conscious level, we're not able to talk about that.
And I think part of what happens in the treatment when it's going well is sort of like you were describing with the child waking up for the dream, where the child may not be able to articulate the dream, but they nestle into their parents and their parents contain the feelings that came up. And so then part of what I think we're doing in the consulting room is building a place where feelings can be held between two people, even if there aren't words.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I think in the trauma you create that possibility to dreaming, right?
Mm. I think that is important what you mean, Marilyn, in your paper, that with the example you describe is this part when you said, oh, you put it in your patient, but I think it's general, is to search for knowledge. Just that you say searching for secret knowledge. I think it's important. I don't know if it's a concept, but it's a good, it's a goal when you have these areas that patients can talk about. So to search is like to try to look for words in that silence zones or that silence areas of the patient. I think it's very nice, searching for secret knowledge.
And I think it's one place where Lacan helps us out in sort of pointing to the primacy of the person's own knowledge and how our job is to hold a space where that can be found rather than sort of reverting to us being the repositories of the knowledge. I think we're really like the containers that can make it possible for somebody to know themselves, which is part of what's really important about the dream. The people in Canada at Chief Freak who work with psychotic people and dreams, they say that, you know, the dream is important because it is the symptom, but it is the person's production as opposed to the hallucination that comes from the outside. And I think in principle, that's true for all of us. The dream is our production and we can find ourselves in our dreams. And the analyst's job is to point back toward the person finding themselves.
I think that what you mean, and it's so important because it's the point of the webinar. Dreams still matter to psychoanalysis. It's not an old concept from Freud from the 1900s because of the this big article on that initiate on was became the foundation of psychoanalysis. It still matters. It still is important for us, and
even more now, where you have all this information
that's it.
that pretends to be truth and you have no context, but in your lived experience you have context.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we have to support the dreams, support in the best sense, no? And I don't know if it happens to you, but when the patient comes to the consultant, to the session, and says, "Oh, I have a dream," I'm so happy because, okay, tell what about, what is about, because it's so important. Felipe, you want to?
No, I just thinking in the secret of the knowledge of the dreams, and I share with you the same experience, right? It's like being able to transform and find with the analysis that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of us is the analysis dreams for us too, right? They bring to us that dream. It's important for us too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an effect of what you mean, Felipe, in your paper about it's a transference, because when the transference is installed, dreams appears.
Yeah.
No?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I will make an space to the questions. I will open the space for the question from the audience. I have one question, and said, several questions reflects on the title of the webinar. And I say, and this one, what is your opinion on the current role of dreams in contemporary psychoanalysis? Do the panelists find that institutes curricula devote less attention to dreams now than they once did? Wants to answer?
I find that in my experience, people don't know what to do with dreams and are intimidated by them. And there's the idea that that there's a secret knowledge that the person doesn't have. And I think we're doing a disservice in our training when that is how people experience things. I also hear from people that there's not enough Freud being taught. And so I think, you're pointing back, Laura, to the interpretation of dreams. And I think that there's something in that work where Freud was figuring things out and doing it in relation to his own experience as a dreamer, in relation to his patients' dreams, and that we would do well to invite our students to go back to that method and to learn how to be an analyst by being a dreamer.
Yeah, I absolutely, totally. Yes, I'm with you. I think that there is an idea that working with dreams or interpretation of dreams is something from the beginning of Freud's issues or the thing or concepts, and it sounds old. It's from the, and
yeah, and I think part of the problem was that Freud was very sort of cued into words. And so then it sort of seems like, oh, you should be like that. You should be able to notice a pun or notice a play on words. And not all work like that. I certainly don't. And so I think it's sort of alienating, sort of like, oh, I can't find those things but if you allow somebody's dreams to register in you and have ideas about them, then you invite the person to have their own ideas, which is really what it's about.
yeah,
Felipe.
yeah, I understand.
No, I
Felipe?
was thinking in my experience here in US, in Washington, and this type of client or patients who I see every time in the clinical community centers, and they are open to share with with me, but with the other counselors too, their dreams. But in some reason, when you share that experience with the other counselors who are not part of that psychoanalysis group, right? They feel like you are a kind of wizard, right? Who see the future or something like that, right? But also they are open to know more about the dream. So it's a kind of, it depends on you and your way to feel that clinic, right, with the patient.
Yes, I think that what you're meaning, Felipe and Marilyn both, it's the how the position of the analyst in that situation. It's so important because we are not the owner of the knowledge. We don't have the knowledge. The knowledge is inside the person. So you have to put in that position. That's the position of the analyst.
Mhm.
And you have to it's a job, it's a work. You have to put in movement, no?
Yeah.
Okay. Another point I underline from Marilyn is well, the point of the metaphor. The metaphor is so important in dreams. No? Because it's the how you can move from the literal to the deep unconscious. And that's the how you can listen to that metaphor is so important.
Well, I think it's, you know, if you're open to the possibilities of metaphor, then you move into a more playful kind of a space where you can invite somebody to play with things. Because part of what happens for people is they get sort of rigid when they're stuck, particularly. And from that place, it's hard to know anything or learn anything. So trying to just sort of soften the idea that that you have to know in order to find helps people play. And, you know, that goes back to Winnicott and his appreciation of the importance of being able to play and the relationship between playing and dreams.
That's so, well, it's very, very nice, the relationship you make between Winnicott, the squiggle, and well, I work with children. I haven't treatment children, so it's so important to play with the kids. So I was very close to your idea of how work with dreams is very close to the idea of Winnicott squiggle.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And many of our adult patients are stuck at kid level, at developmental places that, you know, where they didn't get to some of those milestones that we need to get in order to become more fully persons.
Yeah. I have another question. Well, thanks for the good panel. Thinking of transgeneration, would the navel of the dream, in the sense the point of stop of Laura put it, as I mentioned the navel of the dream, perhaps have something to do with previous generations? What do you think?
I think it partly has to do with previous generations, but it also has to do with what can't be known. I think of Laplanche's enigmatic signifiers, you know, the sense of meaning, but not having the wherewithal to know what the meaning is. And also Pierre Alagnier's ideas about the very early experience where there's emotional messages that sort of affect who we are in the world and how we feel about ourselves, but we can't get to them. And I think part of our job as psychoanalysts is to have respect for the navel that is both unknowable in terms of knowing exactly what the story is, but knowable affectively in terms of know about the person and their experience, both within their family and also across the generations in their family. Because part of where people get stuck is where their parents got stuck in relation to the previous generations.
Felipe?
Yeah, I was thinking in in the dreams, but also in that idea we are of in a primitive situation too, right? So when the patient dreams, we feel something in our conscious transference too. And when I say that, I was wondering about the body sensations, or even in that kind of tiny signals in when the analyst tell us that dream too, right? And I think that will be part of that. To me, that will be part of the first generation too. So they share a kind of symptoms too. You can see that, right? In the same environment. So the dreams can show you that too. And I just wanted to tell you something because I was doing my research about the generational trauma, but I was wondering what happened when the dreams came true in the third generation in Chile. One of the effects of that social explosion, like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, um, part of that meaning was that third generation who was able to think about that and make changes in the society too. So I was wondering how that trauma appears, but the third generation makes something to open that secret in the family and share that experience too about that traumatic experiences. So that will be a way to find a new meanings of the trauma too.
Okay, interesting. This comes the third question. It's very important because when I read your paper, Felipe, I thought something related with this question. I will tell you. In Holocaust descent generation, yes, as Laura said, for the first generation, it's very difficult to talk about that. As I referred that question to you in the beginning, but I was thinking in the Holocaust, but I didn't say it, but this person refers in the Holocaust. And well, this person continued, often the second generation may suffer from depressions of other effects, while only the third generation might have more access or freedom in a way to address their history, common to them all. Please say more about the third generation.
Okay. Well, to me, the third generation is more able to talk about that. They don't feel that silence, but they probably do more like actings or act without think about that too. So they don't feel that pressure to don't talk. They even in some moment they have a strange feeling something's going on in the family with my grandmother, with my grandfather, but they don't know what that's the meaning of that. And when I did that example about Chile, my first hypothesis was the third generation could be disconnected with that first generation. But sounds not. They are able to think, they are able to talk, they are able to change a part of that traumatic experience and being able to dream or symbolize that experiences too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
Mary?
I find in thinking about the generations of Holocaust survivors that there are times when the third generation repairs something with the first generation, that their parents got stuck in certain ways, but they're able to go back, and because they're able to move on, they're able to go back and be with the first generation in a way that repairs something because there was movement forward.
Yeah. I think, well, I think that it is the difference, no? What happens in the third generation, because there are more distance, there are, well, a lot of things happens in the middle. So it helps a lot. So they can talk more. No?
Yeah. And
Agree, Felipe?
the frozenness of trauma for the first generation, because something has progressed. Wherever they're stuck, they've set in motion something that has life in the future. I think it's profound.
Felipe, you agree?
Yeah, I'm agree with that. Yeah.
Another question is, What would you say about such dreams where clients dream about their therapists? Mm,
There can be so many ways a patient dream
sí,
about.
un poquito, a little bit, ¿no? Sí.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, that's part of the countertransference, and
Mhm.
Bion talk a lot of that.
But it goes backward and forward if you think that a dream is people characters in dreams are always to some extent self-representations. You know, then what is the place of the therapist in the dream? Because the therapist is in some sense other, but it's another with whom one identifies and disidentifies. And I think it's very interesting to sort of move beyond the concrete, oh, you're dreaming about me, to, oh, you know, what is your relationship to the me you're dreaming about in the dream? So that we can free ourselves up to play with it rather than getting caught in the more concrete parts.
Well, the example, the clinic example Felipe brought, it's close, not with her dream, but it's close to, well, what you think about if I talk of these issues with you, I don't want to talk with you, or something happens there in the transference with you with all this silence she or wants to keep, no? How
Yeah,
do you feel?
I was thinking, and I always ask to myself, like, who I am for for the analysis at that moment, right? And I try to figure out which place or I could be used or could be in on that dream, but also I'm thinking in the moment of the transference too, right? Because it's different, the dreams in the beginning of the analysis, when you're ending the analysis, and in the middle of the analysis with a regression and all that experiences, right? So to me, it depends of the situation, and
The
well, the
moment.
dreamings in Christmas, it's different. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, do you think that there is a problem in that the first generation is keeping silent in good faith because of the natural desire or protect the second generation and allow them to grow up in a safe world? But they are naively unaware of the anxiety and confusion that those blanks on and hidden facts create in the second generation. What do you think? That they want to keep something
I think it
hidden.
depends of the culture too, right? Because it's different thing the first generation in, I don't know, in Europe or Argentina or in North America, we struggling with different things, right?
That's an important
So
point. The culture.
so yeah, so it's different the way to have a relationship between the first and the second generation, and how much we are open to talk about that or not, right? It depends of justice and other um, experience of the first generations, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's not encourage and say we should talk about this. It's try to figure out there is multiple options or ideas to think about that, but we need to know the culture of that trauma and experiences.
Yeah. I think that you pick a very important a point, Felipe, that when you mention this culture and social situations that are different in different countries, and that makes me available to make the question in the sense of can we make universalize all the concepts of psychoanalysis, or we have to keep something more what's the limit of the working with psychoanalysis and all the parts of the world is the same? All the cultures are the same, or is different? Or we have to listen to different points, each culture. Well,
I think-
you refer, no? But I think that we have difference in that point, no?
I
But
think if you really respect the fact of the individuality of each person and the importance of each person appreciating themselves as a unique individual, then that's also nested within culture. And it's important, I think, to hold those things lightly so that you can find commonalities and also notice differences. Because even within a culture, there's people have different relationships to that culture. So you can't ever rest on assuming that everything's the same to the same or too different. So we always have to we can never be too comfortable in the work, because the person needs to press back, and we need to notice what we're missing, because we're always missing things because we funnel through our own lenses. And I think the psychoanalyst job is to be open to what we didn't realize, including differences both in cultures and in people's experience of culture.
Felipe?
No, I have another idea, but it's about you was talking about the social and cultural, but I was wondering, well, when we have two languages or we speak two languages and we dream in the other one, like in English, but you talk usually in Spanish, right? And that's a way to connect something too. Like we live different analysis, different ways to dreams, depending of the language too, right? Probably my way to do psychoanalysis here in the US is gonna be different than in Chile, because part of that culture appears on me, right? The Chilean culture, but also I'm trying to merge in this culture too. So it's so different too. And the way to dream probably it's gonna be the same. It's gonna be different.
So we have to listen to the difference of cultures.
Yeah.
Unless we are all unsatisfied from the very beginning. We don't have everything. We have problems everywhere. We have issues everywhere. We speak different language, but in the point we have our own neighbors. The point. So yeah, interesting. Another question is, can you elaborate on dreams as productions versus hallucinations as coming from the outside? Who wants to answer?
Well, I think hallucinations appear to be coming from the outside, but they come from the inside. And so it's the person's relationship to their own production, their own construction. And so then part of the analyst job is to be interested in what gets put outside, whether it's getting projected into us or someone else, or whether it's projected into a hallucination, or whether it's produced in a dream. You know, that how the person is manifesting their psychic reality is part of what they're bringing us.
Okay, yeah, it's part of the inside. No, it's part of the inside.
Yeah.
Another question is, I would like to ask about the object that Felipe was talking about, do you see this type of object as that Willy Baranger called the dead living object of the transgenerational of a second generation? Um,
Can you repeat the first part, Laura? The-
I would like to ask about the insane object, como
Uh-huh.
el objeto insano,
Yeah.
that you were talking about. Do you see this type of object as what Willy Baranger called the dead living object of the transgenerational of a second generation?
I mean, I don't know about too much about Willy Barringer, but this dimensional object, when it was talking about, it's a way to don't being able to transform that experience or that nightmares, or well, often says the not being able will be you're not able to transform that bad dream, and the bad dream is part of that traumatic experience. But I think in the first generation, or when you are able to transform that, you are in a kind of in the middle, in between the nightmare, like able to talk about that and think and transform in alpha elements, and the beta, right? So, and that will be the bad dream. And I think part of the effects of the trauma is part of me in the first generation, if we think about that, are not able to think about that experience. So the second and third generation suffer that effects, and they live with that with that part of that object who is not able to transform. And well, I think Abraham and Toro express more than that, to like living in the death, living with the crypt, that will be like a ghost in the middle of the session, or even in the family.
What you mean about crypt is it's a Torah concept, no? From
Yeah,
Torah.
yeah, yeah. Abraham
Very
and Toro. Yeah,
Abraham
yeah,
and Torah. It's very interesting.
yeah,
Yes, something
yeah.
about it. Please say something about the value of dreams from patients who do not have such traumatic histories. Oh, we talk about that, no? A little bit.
I
We said
think
something.
dreams are always a view into the person. And part of what's important about them is just that the person offers them. The guy I was talking about who just offered the turbulence of the dream. It's an offering, and then how we receive that offering matters. And if you think of him saying, well, it's just turbulent, he's talking about how unsafe everything is, which was true of him, and his difficulty of finding his way in. So then it becomes, in a way, a displacement. So you can't talk about how hard it is to be present or those kinds of things. But in offering the dream, he sort of says, well, everything feels too turbulent. And we can talk about the difficulty of turbulence and being safe and those kinds of things. So it gives us a displacement that's in relation to something that matters to the person. So it always gives us that.
Yes, like it's not always like traumatic history.
No.
No.
Although most people come to psychoanalysis because they're traumatized in relation to not having had what they needed to for a secure attachment, to develop a sense of themselves as a valued person in the world. You know, in my work, I see people who aren't necessarily traumatized with a capital T, but all of them are traumatized with small t or complex trauma, whatever you talk about it, who don't feel like they matter.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You don't need a traumatic scene. well, the traumatic thing is inside of the person,
Yeah.
even if it not happened something terrible, no?
Yeah. And
It's
sometimes
this,
having something terrible that happened sort of feels like, oh, I did really have something terrible that happened. Whereas when nothing terrible happened, why can't I find my way in the world?
yeah.
Because
Maybe
nothing
when you hear the traumatic history is not so traumatic, it's
Yeah.
part of the history, and
Yeah.
that's it. Um. No. This is important question. How do the advance in technologies get incorporated and interpreted in contemporary psychoanalysis? Do you have any thoughts? I think it's important, this questions nowadays.
Do you want to take that, Felipe?
I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking in intelligence artificial, like I noticed some of that patients just go there and trying to ask about the dreams,
The
and they say, I
significant, the
find
meaning of the,
something. Yeah,
that
so
like
I
to find
find
the
something on
meaning.
me,
Wow.
right? So that will be a way to figure out their own experience. But the point is how that is also a way to talk about the dream too, right? And they bring to us just the excuse about the dream, and they was looking for the meaning of that, and they can talk about the dream too. And I was thinking of that differences too. We are dreaming with the analyst is so different, and then yeah, well, then they
Don't you think that asking the GPT the meaning of the
yeah.
dreams, it's a way of defend themselves from, well, I don't
Could
want to talk about me, and I want a quick solution and try to know what the mean is, and that's it. Not I don't want to work. So maybe technology, it's we have to be aware, because people can go through that track and say, oh, well, this is more easy, but it's not like you're not working with your inside, with your trauma, with your feelings, with your thoughts. It's another thing, no? So in that point, I think psychoanalysis and technology, in the way you said, Felipe, no way,
I
it's not
think
working.
happening in our world is that there's such an inundation of information that's disembodied without much wherewithal for being able to make decisions about how to think about the information. And psychoanalysis, at best, sits on the other side of that continuum and argues, kind of like you were saying, Felipe, for an embodied knowledge, for something that comes from our experience that can anchor our experience. This guy with the turbulent dreams was trying to make a decision, couldn't make a decision. And I just kept pushing him to think about how he felt about it, and not to look for some outside criterion, but to find his own relationship to it. Because
Absolutely.
so many people are just so lost and don't even have the idea that it matters how they would feel about something. And that's where I think psychoanalysis can be really important in terms of taking a stand for the lived experience.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. So we have to make the effort to make the difference.
And that's also how we develop reflective capacities. The ability to think is based on, our perceptions of things. And we have to take ourselves seriously in order to develop our reflective capacities.
That's true. Another question, this is important too. Do you think that dreams could be an important material for studying populations, areas, and collective conflicts?
Well, I think about social dreaming. which people use as a way of sort of seeing where the public mind is in a deeper kind of a way, which both provides information and also helps people find one another across differences.
Mm.
Yeah.
Felipe?
I'm thinking in the
We
well,
can think in your example, no? That probably
but I was thinking and also when you are struggling with the different situations, social situations in your country, probably, I'm thinking there is a kind of dreams who are able to express a kind of desire to be free or to be able to do something different too, right? And this will be, I'm thinking in my patients who suffer trauma and the dictatorship, and they always being able to change something, even in the family, change something in the future, dreaming with the new ideas. That dreams appears, and it's a way to survive too, in some point, to
Mhm.
that social or situation, even that war. We can think about that, right?
Mm. Uh, what do another one, what do the analysts think about interpreting symbolism in dreams? Is it still relevant, excuse me, and important in dream work outside of transference? Does this include language with multiple meanings and slips?
I think it's all important
Yeah.
to be open to the possibilities of meaning, the echoes of meaning, the reverberations, and to be inviting of meaning making rather than closing down the space.
You have to include everything. You have to include everything, no?
Mm.
Felipe?
Yeah, I was thinking in Marilyn and that idea to playing together, right? We are playing together. When you offer to me that dream,
Mm-hmm.
we can think together, be
Mhm.
open. Mhm.
Mhm.
Another question is, do you think there is a correlation between the reveries of the therapist in sessions and the dreams a client chooses to share?
Absolutely. I think, the funny thing about psychoanalysis is we talk all the time about the unconscious, but when we encounter it, we're surprised and sort of shocked and taken aback. But there is something about what happens at the unconscious level between two people when they spend so much time together that that is really powerful. And we do, if we're available to the other person, we get tuned into their rhythms and their meanings, their metaphors, both at the conscious and at the unconscious level.
It's include.
Yeah.
It's include, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. In terms of collective dreams, there are a lot of questions. I'm very, very good. People are working. In terms of collective dreams, there were large and interesting studies in the time of the COVID pandemic, for instance. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, there was a huge study at the university, very interesting. Well, that's, I don't know what it's about, but maybe it's important. It's about the question if the dreams have a relationship with social situation. The COVID pandemic was very.
Well, for me, what this question marks is people are starting to really appreciate the importance of being able to look at what's happening amongst people at different levels, including the unconscious level. And the dream is one index for that. And I think it's one of the things that COVID gave us, because it was such a strange space, that it broke into a lot of our conventions about being together and thinking about people with one another. And I think it led to some very interesting insights.
Yeah, it was a big issue, the COVID pandemic, all over the world. Yeah. Another is Rafael Lopez Corvo's book on the traumatic loneliness of children suggests that everyone has been traumatized in various ways. This is so interesting because dreams are a window into the title trauma, into the little t traumas that may not be known. Would the presenters agree or have something to add? Do you know the book Lopez?
No, but I
Me
think
too.
it's really important and topical. Did you want to say something, Felipe?
No, I don't know the book, so
Yeah.
I don't know neither, so we can ask.
That's really what we're up against, that we live in a world where, part of going back to the thing about, technology, we live in a world where we're kind of alienated from ourselves. And I think, there's something about the transgenerational transmission of parenting that's gotten a little bit lost. And so I think as virtual space comes forward more, kids are more lost. And certainly people like Stranger are talking about how young people are finding themselves in relation to their virtual peers more than their parents. And there's a dislocation that's happening because of a certain lack of containment, I think, in the early parent-child bonds that are leaving people in that small t trauma space that it is important for us to recognize so we can help people find themselves.
You talk, Marilyn, about the T, the big T or the little T. You make a reference on that. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I've been working on. Because those are the people I see, people who are just lost in relation to themselves. And it's the failures across the generations, certainly in this country, there's a lack of parenting, sort of generally.
Yes, you look or you hear a lot of that situation, lack of parenting.
Yeah, that doesn't give people the wherewithal to develop their capacities to know themselves and know other people and make choices that are adaptive. And yeah, so small t trauma, yeah, big.
Okay, wow. The last question will be, would you like to comment about dreams as affect regulation as indicated in Bollever and Fishman's research? Dreams are embodied memories. Somebody talk about this reference. No?
I don't know the reference, but the concept makes sense to me.
Yeah.
What about you, Felipe?
I'm quite sure about that idea, right? But I was thinking with you right now. And I'm thinking in that idea when the first and second generations communicate something, right? The way to communicate, it's not with the verbal or unconscious, it's also with the body too. So part of that will be, to me, how that experience in the body could be transmitted to in the body of the second generation. also Cicerone talks about that. And he talks about how different disease appears in the second generations, which are connecting between the first and second generations cause of trauma. So
Interesting.
Interesting. Well, okay, last like 5 minutes, so we can make the last contribution of each. I can begin saying something, and then I give your space to say something to end the webinar. For me, it was very nice to be part of this webinar and exchange ideas with you. And I will refer as my first point of this introduction I made when the webinar began, and to reaffirm that the title of the webinar, "Do Dreams Still Matter for Psychoanalysis?" is the question, and I think that because all what we talk, yes, still matter, and a lot. For us as psychoanalysts, is matter a lot. So thank you for joining this webinar, and I will give you some minutes to give what you ever want. Say what you ever want. Marilyn?
Yes, it's been a real pleasure thinking about these things and talking with both of you and hearing your thoughts. I think that probably dreams matter more than ever, because it is the place where we can find ourselves and where we as psychoanalysts can leave space for somebody to find themselves. And so I hope that what people take away from today is, yes, dreams still matter. And for those of you who do this work, to trust yourselves to help your patients find themselves, because it really, psychoanalysis is about having respect for the embodied individual and you know, the meanings that each person makes, so that we can support one another rather than getting in our way.
Thank you, Felipe.
yes, I wanted to say thank you, Laura, Marilyn, Mariano, and Agustin for sharing with us and dream together. I think dreams matter, and it's depend of us the way to understand and interpret that dreams. So thank you for this opportunity too, and thank you for the audience too.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for their participations. Thanks Mariano, Rupert Hoods for helping with the questions, and thank you Agustin for technical support. And I want to announce the next webinar. The title is Psychosis, Does Psychoanalysts Have a Chance? They will take place September 27 at 4 p.m. London time. Okay, the panelists will be Alfredo Ortiz, Fragola, and Franco De Messi. And the moderator will be Elizabeth Dance. So see you in the next webinar. Thank you a lot, Marilyn, again, and Felipe. It was very nice to join this and work together. And see you soon.
Been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.